There was a time when Kevin Stefanski's calm felt like the Browns' greatest weapon, a steadying force in a franchise built on turbulence. But somewhere along the way, that calm stopped reassuring anyone. It started to feel distant, almost icy, like a leader watching a storm from behind glass instead of stepping into it with his players. And inside that locker room, where emotions run hotter than any stadium spotlight, that shift hit harder than most people realize. Rumors began swirling, quiet at first, then louder, players feeling unheard, energy slipping, belief fading. But everything changed the moment Myles Garrett finally said what no one else would. That confrontation didn't just spark drama, it exposed something far more alarming. A team built on grit suddenly looked hollow, and the coach who once held it all together is now at the center of a crisis no stat sheet can explain. For years, Kevin Stefanski's greatest advantage wasn't a play design or a game day adjustment. It was his presence. He walked into Cleveland with a calm that cut through the chaos, a quiet confidence that made players feel like the franchise finally had an adult in the room. After decades defined by constant turnover and emotional volatility, his steady voice felt like a reset button. Players bought in because they believed that composure meant control, that measured leadership meant the Browns were building something real, and for a while it worked. The locker room fed off that stability, trusting that behind the expressionless exterior was a coach who always had the answers. His even-keeled approach became a symbol of hope for a team that had spent too long drowning in noise. But the thing about composure is that it only works when the foundation underneath it is solid. Once cracks start forming, calm can look a lot like distance, and in Cleveland, those cracks never stay hidden for long. The first signs of trouble didn't show up in headlines. They showed up in the way the team carried itself. What used to look like quiet focus started drifting into something closer to emotional flatlining. Players walked off the field with blank stares, the sideline energy thinned out, and the spark that once defined the locker room felt like it was slipping through the cracks. No shouting matches, no dramatic blow-ups, just a slow fade that only the people inside the building seemed to notice at first. Rumors began circulating that conversations behind closed doors felt stiff, that team meetings lacked the edge they used to have, and that players were starting to question whether their coach felt what they felt. Losses hit differently, heavier, like the group wasn't just frustrated, but disconnected. And the strange part was how subtle it looked from the outside. Nothing explosive, nothing chaotic, just a gradual shift from belief to uncertainty, the kind of emotional drift that creeps in quietly until suddenly it's impossible to ignore. Everything that had been simmering beneath the surface finally erupted the moment Myles Garrett confronted Kevin Stefanski. Reports claim it didn't happen in a quiet corner or through vague hints. It unfolded right in the center of the locker room, with the entire team watching. And what made the moment so powerful wasn't volume or aggression, it was the honesty. Garrett, usually the calmest presence in the building, spoke with a tone that cut through every layer of polite silence the team had been hiding behind. Rumors suggest he called out what players had been whispering for weeks, that the passion was gone, that the locker room felt disconnected, and that their coach's steady demeanor no longer matched the emotional weight the team was carrying. He wasn't attacking strategy, he was questioning connection. What followed said even more. No player stepped in to cool things down, and no one jumped in to defend the coach. The room didn't erupt, it froze. That heavy, uncomfortable silence became the real breaking point. It was the kind of silence that made every player realize they weren't the only one feeling the disconnect. And when a leader like Garrett speaks up and the room stays quiet, it sends a message louder than any argument could. Whether every detail happened exactly as rumored, not, the fallout was undeniable. In that moment, whatever emotional thread had been holding the team together snapped, exposing a fracture the Browns could no longer hide. Once word of the confrontation leaked, everything the Browns had tried to keep contained behind closed doors exploded into the public spotlight. What had started as whispers inside the facility turned into a full-scale media frenzy almost overnight. Reporters began digging, Insiders started talking, and suddenly, every sports show had a segment questioning the Browns' leadership. Headlines framed the situation as a locker room on the brink, with rumors suggesting that Stefanski's connection to his players had been fading long before the blow-up. Even the more cautious analysts couldn't ignore the pattern forming: emotional detachment from the coach, rising frustration from the roster, and a team that no longer looked unified on Sundays. The Browns front office responded the only way organizations usually do in moments like this, with calm statements that felt rehearsed and carefully sanitized. They insisted everything was fine, that the locker room was strong, that the team was, quote, focused on football. But the problem was that none of those lines matched the reality people were seeing on the field. Fans kept pointing to the lack of energy during games, the lifeless post-game interviews, the sideline body language that looked more like resignation than resolve. And the more the organization tried to project stability, the more the public questioned whether the situation was actually slipping out of their control. To make matters worse, Garrett's subtle social media posts added fuel to the fire. Nothing explicit, nothing direct, just vague enough to spark speculation, but pointed enough to make fans wonder if something deeper was unraveling. Those posts spread fast, turning doubt into full-blown conversation across every platform. Comment sections filled with theories, talk shows debated leadership failures, and the narrative shifted from a tough stretch of games to a franchise drowning in internal disconnect. By the time the next game rolled around, the Browns weren't just battling their opponent, they were battling a storyline that had already taken on a life of its own, one that painted the team as fractured, frustrated, and dangerously close to another organizational reset. The fallout didn't stay in the locker room. It walked straight on to the field. You could see it in the way the Browns played even before the confrontation became public. A team with this much talent shouldn't look disjointed. Yet, week after week, the on-field product felt like a group running on fumes. Drives stalled not because of complicated schemes, but because the rhythm just wasn't there. Defensive lapses appeared in moments that used to be this unit's strength, with coverages that looked hesitant instead of instinctive. Offensive timing felt off, almost like players were reacting half a second too late, not out of confusion, but out of a lack of collective spark. Fans and analysts started noticing the same subtle pattern. The body language didn't match the roster on paper. Guys walked to the sideline without the urgency they had shown in the past. Mistakes snowballed faster. Even celebrations, the small moments that show a team's heartbeat, seemed muted or missing entirely. Rumors circulated that practices felt unusually quiet, that communication during games wasn't as sharp, and that some players looked more frustrated with the environment than the game plan itself. None of this pointed to a talent issue. If anything, the roster looked more capable than ever. But talent without belief is a hollow engine, and belief is the one thing that seemed to be draining every single week. The Browns didn't look defeated. They looked emotionally disconnected, like a group trying to perform while carrying something heavier than a losing streak. That kind of shift doesn't show up on stat sheets, but it shows up everywhere else, in effort, in chemistry, in the way players look toward the sideline for guidance and walk away feeling like something is missing. By the time the losses began stacking up, the symptoms were impossible to ignore. What the outside world saw on Sundays was just the visible layer of a deeper issue, a team not lacking skill, but lacking the emotional glue that turns skill into wins. And as the performances dipped, the questions only grew louder. Was this a slump or the early stages of a collapse fueled by a leadership connection that had cracked far earlier than anyone realized? There was a time when Kevin Stefanski's calm felt like the perfect antidote to Cleveland's constant turbulence. His steady voice, controlled emotions, and measured approach brought order to a franchise that had lived in permanent chaos for years. But leadership isn't static. What works in one moment can fall flat in another, and the NFL is ruthless when that shift happens. As the Browns' emotional temperature changed, Stefanski's demeanor didn't, and that mismatch became impossible for players to ignore.
Rumors suggest that what once looked like poise has started to feel like distance, as if the coach is operating from a place just a step removed from the intensity his team is battling through every day. In calmer seasons, analytical leadership can thrive. It gives players something stable to rely on, a steady foundation to build around. But during a crisis, when frustration is stacking up and belief is draining out of the room, players don't want a wall of composure. They want someone who shows they're in the fight with them. Someone who feels the highs and lows. Someone who reacts. And when they don't see that, doubt starts creeping in fast. Reports claim some players began wondering whether their coach understood the emotional weight they were carrying, or if he was simply waiting for things to fix themselves. That quiet separation opens the door to something far more dangerous: detachment. Not intentional, not malicious, just a widening gap between how the coach leads and what the team actually needs. Modern locker rooms aren't built on X's and O's alone. They thrive on connection, vulnerability, and a sense of shared fire. Without that, game plans start to feel like instructions instead of inspiration. And the moment players start seeing leadership as distant instead of connected, the emotional heartbeat of the team begins to dim. Stefanski's style hasn't suddenly become wrong, but it may no longer fit the reality Cleveland is living in. The roster is talented but fragile. The pressure is high. The expectations are heavy. And when a team is emotionally frayed, strategy alone can't pull them back together. They need a leader who steps into the energy of the room, not above it. A leader who shows the same urgency they're feeling. And until that shift happens, the Browns will keep fighting a battle that has nothing to do with play design and everything to do with connection, the one element this team seems to be missing the most.
This approach risks everything. Rumors suggest some players already feel the disconnect, and if that continues, the fracture only widens. The team won't implode dramatically, it'll fade quietly. Morale drops, effort becomes inconsistent. Leaders in the locker room start carrying weight the coaching staff should be handling, and before anyone says it out loud, the season slips away not because of talent, but because belief wasn't restored when it mattered most. The Browns can't afford that kind of slow collapse, not with the roster they've built, and not with the expectations hanging over the franchise. This moment isn't just about Stefanski protecting his job, it's about whether he can evolve fast enough to save a team that's been running on emotional fumes. If he chooses growth, the locker room could rally behind him. If he chooses silence, the disconnect may become permanent. And once a team tunes out, it's nearly impossible to get them back. That's the crossroads Cleveland is staring at: renewal or erosion, connection or collapse. The choice is his, but the consequences will belong to everyone in that building. The Browns aren't just fighting for a playoff spot anymore. They're fighting for something much bigger. They're fighting for trust, identity, and belief, the things that can't be measured on a stat sheet, but determine everything once a team hits adversity. The confrontation with Myles Garrett didn't create this crisis, it revealed it. It peeled back the layers and exposed a disconnect that had been quietly growing long before anyone said a word. And now the entire organization is standing in a moment that will define how this story ends. Stefanski's calm used to be the glue holding everything together, but today, that same calm feels like the question the team keeps circling around. Can a leader stay composed when the locker room needs him to feel, not just think? There's still time for the Browns to reclaim what they've lost, but time alone won't fix the cracks. It's going to take accountability, honesty, and a level of emotional presence that this team hasn't felt in a long while. If that happens, this entire situation could become the turning point that sparks a new identity, one built on connection instead of quiet tension. But if nothing changes, if the distance between the coach and his players keeps widening, then this season may go down as yet another chapter in a story Cleveland fans know far too well. So now the question shifts from what happened to what comes next. Can Stefanski rebuild the trust that's been slipping away?
Can the locker room rediscover the belief that once made them one of the league's most dangerous teams? Or has the fracture grown too deep to repair? Let us know where you stand, because this moment isn't just about football. It's about leadership, emotion, and the thin line between a team that's united and a team that's unraveling. And in Cleveland, that line has never felt thinner than it does right now.